When a supermodel fell in love with an Olympic hero, their romance captured headlines. But behind the glamour and success was a story that would end in heartbreak and scandal. This is the Reeva Steenkamp story. Meghan, great to see you.
I've been waiting for this case. I was waiting for one of us to commit to it, I think, and it's you. It's you.
Well, do you know why I finally committed to it?
Because it came up on the suggestion list so
Well,
often?
yes, we've received so many requests for this case, but once I realized that today's episode would be released a few days before Valentine's Day, I decided that now was the time to cover it. Because I don't know if you recall, but this event happened on Valentine's Day in 2013.
That's right. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
But you know how I remember that it was Valentine's Day? Because the media ran with the headline, Deadly Valentine. You know how much it irks me when they do stuff like that.
I don't remember that headline very well, to be honest, but okay.
But speaking of, happy Valentine's Day, Meghan. Are you celebrating this year?
I mean, me and Hannah and James are celebrating.
I was going to say, I'm assuming James is no longer your Valentine. Your sweet little baby is.
Oh, they're both my Valentines.
No, well, Hannah's my Valentine.
Okay. Fair. I understand.
All right, so let's go ahead and meet Reeva, who's at the center of today's story. Reeva Steenkamp was born August 19th, 1983 in Cape Town, South Africa. She had two older half-siblings from her father and mother's previous marriage. The family later moved to Port Elizabeth, which was just a few hours west on the southern coast of South Africa. Reeva was an avid horseback rider most of her life until her early 20s when she broke her back in a fall.
Ooh.
Yeah, luckily she obviously survived, but she did have to learn to walk again, but she persevered.
Wow.
She also began participating in modeling and beauty pageants. Now, she had started doing this around the age of 14, and she won several times. Now, after high school, she studied law at the University of Port Elizabeth, and she graduated with her bachelor's in 2005. Shortly after graduation, she got a job as a paralegal, and again, she was working as a model. Now, she appeared in FHM magazine, and she was the first face of Avon Cosmetics in South Africa.
Wow.
And actually, going back to FH magazine, she was ranked number 40 in the 100 sexiest women in the world in 2011.
Okay.
And then she dropped to 45 in 2012.
Well, that's not much of a fall.
No. Have you heard of FHM magazine?
I think so, yeah.
Do you know what it stands for?
For him?
Yes. Yes.
Does it?
Yes, for Him magazine. Yes.
Yeah.
So it's actually a British men's lifestyle magazine, but it's published in many countries. It was definitely published here in the U.S. as well. I'm pretty sure it's only online now, though, in case you are interested. I think their last issue was like 2016 when a lot of magazines started folding.
I'm probably going to skip it, but thanks.
Okay. Now, Reva was somewhat of a local celebrity. She was a regular presenter for Fashion TV in South Africa, and that was just an international fashion and lifestyle broadcasting channel. Mm-hmm. She also starred in many television commercials. There was a range of products, but I think the most popular was probably the commercials that she did for Toyota Land Cruiser.
Oh.
She was also a celebrity contestant on the BBC lifestyle show called Baking Made Easy, and this was in 2012. You watch those types of shows, right, Meghan?
Not really. I watch, I used to watch, what's the one where they would do Nailed It?
Oh, that's good. It looks nothing like the original.
Yeah, that's the one I watch just because it cracks me up. I don't really watch baking shows in general, though.
Okay. Reva was also asked to appear on a South African reality show called Tropica Island of Treasure. This was a reality competition series that had celebrities teaming up with regular people. Now, of course, they were all good looking and they all hung out in their bathing suits as they competed in different, challenges to win money. I looked it up. It's actually still on and it's in its 11th season. So if you're interested, you could check it out.
Okay.
It seems to me it's kind of like a mix between Bachelor in Paradise and Survivor.
I was going to say like a souped up, more fun Survivor with, cocktails and beach bodies.
Yes. Unfortunately, Reva would never actually get a chance to finish her role on that show. But Reva quickly became a regular A-list guest at red carpet events, and she was just a noted socialite in the area.
Wow.
But she had greater career aspirations outside of modeling and entertainment. She never wanted to stop being a lawyer. She was really interested in being an advocate for women in particular. She wanted to pursue a career that would enable her to help women who had been the victims of domestic violence. She often spoke out about violence against women. She would tweet and, post different things on social media anytime there was a news story about a woman who was a victim of violence. Reva applied to take her bar exam in late 2011. As she was preparing for her exams, she met a man named Oscar Pistorius, and this was in November of 2012. Now, that name must sound familiar to you.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yes, Oscar was pretty famous in his own right. He was a South African Olympic and Paralympic runner. Now, Oscar was born with a congenital condition where he had no fibula bones. His legs were amputated below the knee before he was a year old. But this didn't stop him. He went on to become a Paralympic champion who ran with specially designed carbon fiber running blades. I'm sure you know he had the name Blade Runner because of his speed. Interestingly, he even won a ruling that overturned a previous ban that would allow him to compete against able-bodied athletes at the world's biggest track events.
Oh, I don't know if I knew that. Okay.
Yeah, because a lot of people said that he had an unfair advantage because of the blades. There was a lot of research done. If you watch a 30 for 30 on Oscar, they dive into this a lot. And that's one of the sources I used for today's episode. It's very interesting to see how they tested whether or not he had an unfair advantage due to the blades.
Did he?
There was mixed, there were mixed findings. It was concluded yes by some and concluded no by others.
Got it.
But I can tell you that in 2012, he competed at the Olympics, and he finished second in the 400 meters to qualify for the semifinals in London. Now, he didn't end up qualifying for the finals, but either way, this was a huge accomplishment, and Oscar made history. He was the first double amputee to run at the Olympics, and he really became one of the most recognizable athletes on the planet.
Yeah.
Again, he was South African, but he was very popular in the U.S. I mean, I remember seeing him on David Letterman. He was on the cover of magazines here as well. So Oscar and Reva really looked like an up-and-coming power couple. But their relationship would end in tragedy only 3 months in. February 13th, 2013 was a seemingly normal day for the couple. According to Oscar, they went to bed at about 10 p.m. after he arranged 2 fans in the doorway to the balcony. Now, this was in his bedroom. Now, he did this, he says, because the air conditioner was not working. And this is summertime in South Africa. Summer runs from about December to March. Oscar would later say that he usually slept on the right-hand side of the bed, but due to a shoulder injury, that night he was sleeping on the left-hand side of the bed. And we'll talk about why this is important later. In the early morning hours of February 14th, 2013, Oscar says he woke up because the room had become very hot and humid and he could not sleep. He says he got up without his blades on and he moved the fans from the balcony doorway to inside of the room. So he was walking on, and they show this in the 30 for 30. So he was essentially walking on his stumps because he didn't have the blades on. So he was much shorter without them.
Okay.
He says this is when he heard the noise of a window opening in the bathroom and he believed it was an intruder. Now, some people think this is strange. Why would he assume it was an intruder just because he heard a noise?
Right.
So I want to give you a little context here. In general, Oscar was super vigilant and he always felt very vulnerable. And of course, this had to do with his disability.
Okay.
This area also had a high crime rate. Although, I have to say, as you could imagine, he lived in a very upscale part of the city and he had a lot of security and he lived in a gated community. But either way, he says he was still very nervous because in the past, he had been the victim of burglaries and he often received death threats.
Oh.
And this could be due to his celebrity status. Oscar says he then retrieved his gun from beneath the left side of the bed. Now, Oscar was an avid gun user and he was allowed to have a gun. He had gotten a license in 2010. And everyone that knew him knew that he always kept a 9mm under his bed when he slept. According to Oscar, Reva looked like she was sleeping, but he whispered to her to call the police as he moved into a hallway that led into the bathroom. At this time, he had his gun drawn. He says as he moved down the hallway, he leaned against the wall for better stability. And he says his eyes kept moving between the bathroom door and a nearby window. He says he yelled for this person to get out of his house, and then he again yelled to Reva to call the police. He says he felt very vulnerable without his blades on, and he feared that somebody was about to come out of the bathroom. He says he heard the sound of wood moving and that he thought that that was perhaps the door opening. And he says at this point he was, quote, overcome with fear. And this is when he fired 4 shots in quick succession through the bathroom door. Then he retreated back down the hallway, still aiming his gun at the bathroom. He says he then went to the bed to feel for Reva, but he did not find her there. So he thought she was perhaps hiding on the floor, or maybe she was behind the curtains because she heard the commotion. So he says he checked the floor, he checked behind the curtains, and when she was not in either place, he claimed that he began to suspect that Reva may have been in the bathroom. And for him, quote, this is when everything changed. Oscar says he then went back to the bathroom door, still holding the gun, and he tried the doorknob, but it was locked. He went back to the bedroom to put on his blades. He opened the curtain to the balcony and screamed for God to help him. Now, at this point, he did have his legs on, so he was a bit taller, and he had more stability. In fact, he says he put them on because he needed to break down that door, but without his legs, he couldn't really do that. So he says he first slammed into the door with his body, and then he got a cricket bat and smashed a hole in the door so that he could reach through and open the doorknob. This is when Oscar discovered Reva laying on the floor with gunshot wounds. She had one to her upper arm, one to her hip, one through one of her hands, and one to her head. He says he sat over her and cried before going back to the bedroom to get his phone.
I imagine she was deceased because she had one to the head immediately. So
yes, I don't believe that Oscar necessarily thought she was at this point, or maybe it was just wishful thinking. I'm not sure, but she was deceased at this point. At 3:19 a.m., he called a neighbor, and then at 3:20 a.m., he phoned the ambulance service, and at 3:21 a.m., he called security at his estate. Now, there are some mixed reports as to the order of these calls. Some say he called the ambulance first, others say he called security first, and then there's others that say that he called a neighbor first. Either way, they all took place within 3 minutes of each other. Emergency services suggested that he attempt to drive Reva to the hospital rather than wait for first responders. Now, I've never heard this. I have no idea. I don't know if the hospital was far. Again, this seems kind of strange because usually they have you immediately start life-saving efforts and not move the body. So I don't actually know what was going on here. So I just wanted to point that out. Did you ever hear of that before?
No. I think usually what you said, like they ask you if you can do life-saving. I don't know that they want you to move people either when they don't know what the injuries are, because you could possibly hurt someone as well or make it worse. So, no, I haven't heard of that before.
Okay. Oscar picked up Reva and took her downstairs near the front door. A neighbor arrived and later reported that at this point, Oscar had his fingers in her mouth trying to keep her airway open and one hand on her hip to stop the bleeding. Police and paramedics soon arrived on the scene and they informed Oscar that Reva was deceased. By all accounts, he was inconsolable and even got physically ill a few times. He even asked the police if he could wash his bloody hands because the smell was making him ill. Even 2 hours later, Oscar was again asking the police to please just take photos of him or do whatever they needed to do so he could take off his blood-soaked clothing.
Yeah.
Oscar was arrested for the murder of his girlfriend. There was no question as to who shot Reva. He admitted that. But now it was up to the court to decide if it was intentional. Dubbed South Africa's O.J. Simpson trial, Oscar Pistorius' trial began on March 3, 2014, and the Pretoria High Court allowed the proceedings to be filmed live. So this entire trial was broadcast live via audio, and many parts of the trial were also broadcast live via television.
Yeah, I think I remember. I think I remember seeing it.
Yeah, the pictures of Oscar were everywhere because he was very distraught.
Yeah.
And again, if this is like O.J. Simpson in South Africa, people were really watching this case.
I think I remember him being extremely emotional or holding his head and just, distraught. I think that's what I remember.
Yeah. And just a side note, in South Africa, they did away with jury trials around 1989. So basically what they have a judge who hears the case, but the judge is allowed to consult with many experts on different parts of the evidence.
That is so interesting. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Wow. I love when we learn stuff like this.
I know. That's why I love doing international cases, because we learn tidbits like that.
Right.
And actually, I don't think it's such a bad idea. I think the U.S. might want to consider abolishing jury. But we'll save that for another day. While the defense was arguing that Oscar shot Reva because it was a mistake, he believed she was a dangerous intruder in his home, Prosecutors were not buying that. Prosecutors alleged that he killed her intentionally in a late-night argument.
Ah, okay. That's what it was, right.
And there's some evidence to support this. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about, the prosecution's case.
Okay.
So prosecutors argued that Oscar had a history of angry outbursts, as well as a history of being verbally abusive towards girlfriends and also acting recklessly with guns. There are several occasions where he fired, warning shots or just fired his gun accidentally. He was seemingly very irresponsible with his firearm. And then there was also many ex-girlfriends who would talk about, violent tendencies. So let's go through some of the biggest points at trial. Now, the first was about his prosthetic legs. Remember I said he claimed to be sleeping on the left side of the bed?
Yes.
Well, this was a bit suspect because his iPad and his prosthetic legs were found on the right-hand side of the bed, while Reva's bag and her sandals were found on the left-hand side of the bed. So, they said that this is strange. I don't put too much stock in this because it's possible they decided to switch after they were already settled.
I was going to say that if he had a shoulder injury and they got in bed and he was like, ow, this hurts, can you just switch with me? And they were going to sleep anyway, then maybe
Exactly.
It wouldn't be. But understood. It still doesn't look great.
Yeah, one of the weaker points, I would say.
Okay.
The prosecution would also point to potential premeditation if Oscar had been wearing his prosthetics at the time of the alleged break-in. Now, of course, if there was an intruder, then he would have no time to put his legs on.
Mm-hmm.
The defense says he was not wearing them, and the prosecution says he was wearing them. Now, you want to take a guess how they were able to kind of sort through this?
I imagine they did a reconstruction of the shooting and the angles and the height.
Very smart, Meghan. A ballistic expert testified that based on the height and the angle of the shots, that the shooter was most likely not wearing his prosthetic legs.
Right.
This doesn't seem very absolute or scientific. If you watch the 30 for 30, you'll get a little more information about it. Mm-hmm. But it is an interesting point when you look at the height of where the gunshots were in the door.
Right.
Now, the couple's relationship was a very important point during trial. Again, they'd only been together for about 3 months, and there were mixed testimonies as to how well the couple got along.
I didn't realize it was such a short amount of time.
It was very short, but it was a bit expedited. The two, I believe their first date, she walked the red carpet with him at some big event. Wow. So things were moving, I guess, somewhat quickly. And by many accounts, they were already in love and spending a lot of time together.
All right. Let's hear about what people, I'm curious about what people said about them and their dynamic.
So most people, as you would imagine, most people for the defense said they had a loving relationship. And then you have people for the prosecution that says not so much so.
Sorry, any reports of physical violence that we know of prior to the incident?
Not towards Reva, but there was a situation where he apparently slammed a door on one of his ex-girlfriends and also an ex-girlfriend's friend. There was some civil issues going on, no criminal charges, but he was being sued in some of these other cases for harming people.
Interesting.
Now, the majority they would look at the text messages. That was going to be a big point.
Yeah.
And the majority of their text messages, and there were thousands upon thousands, these two were texting a lot. And as they say in trial, about 90% of their text messages were described as loving and normal. But there were a few from Reva that were somewhat problematic.
All right.
Now, some of these would accuse Oscar of jealousy and possessiveness. In one of them that was sent about 3 months before her death, she said, quote, "I'm scared of you sometimes, of how you snap at me."
Wait, that's so interesting because that's also at the very beginning if they were only dating for 3 months. So that's
the
really,
honeymoon stage, right?
Yeah, well, it's really soon.
She also describes his behavior as nasty. They did say that 90% of these messages were normal or loving. But I think it's important to note that if the 10% are things saying you scare me, that's going to weigh a little bit more. I don't think we're looking apples to apples here. It's not like that message said like you gave me an attitude before or I'm mad at you for not answering my phone call. That's a pretty serious thing to say. I'm scared of you.
Yeah,
I don't know about you, but I've never texted in any relationship telling someone I was scared of them.
I can't recall that either. No.
Yeah. But despite these messages, on February 13th, actually just a few hours before she died, Reva sent Oscar a text message saying, "You are an amazing person with so many blessings and you are more than cared for." And his reply was, "Stay tonight if you like."
Oh, okay. So doesn't seem like they were having a fight then? You don't know what happened after, but at least there's no evidence right now pointing in that direction.
Reva also gave Oscar a Valentine's Day card that read, quote, "I think today is a good day to tell you that I love you." Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, he would not open this card until after this happened because they were going to be exchanging gifts the next day.
Right.
Well, later in that day.
Right.
Despite these messages, the prosecution said that the night of the shooting, the couple had a loud argument because some neighbors claimed that they heard a woman crying. But then the defense argued that what the neighbors heard was actually Oscar screaming. And they said when he screamed out, he had a very high pitch, and neighbors mistakenly believed that that was a woman screaming. There was also some neighbors who said they heard gunshots, but the timing doesn't quite line up. The defense is saying that Oscar banging down the door may have been misheard as gunshots. So like we see in any other trial, the prosecution and the defense are going to explain these things differently.
Yeah.
There was also a focus on Oscar's mental state. As we talked about before, he had many emotional outbursts during trial. Mm-hmm. Now, this would include crying and wailing, and he even vomited several times in the courtroom.
Wow.
Now, I don't judge this. I don't think this is indicative of guilt or innocence. No. I think everyone processes things different. But as you could imagine, people looked at this and judged it in different ways.
Yeah.
Some people said this is a sign of a grieving innocent man. Other people said this is the sign of a man who realizes his whole life is destroyed. Maybe he feels guilty. Either way, the courts would decide what his mental state was, and they issued a psych assessment. It was concluded that Oscar had an anxiety disorder that stemmed from his childhood. His parents separated when he was 6 years old, and his father was hardly ever around. His mother was described as extremely anxious, and she slept with a firearm under her pillow.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
Oscar's mom died in 2002, and the assessment said that Oscar had lost an emotional attachment figure at this point. The assessment also focused on his disability, saying that he was more likely to respond to any threat with a fight rather than a flight response.
Huh.
Which I find interesting.
Why?
Well, because he felt more vulnerable, because he felt that he couldn't protect himself as well, perhaps.
Huh. Okay.
The evaluation concluded that Oscar was not mentally incapacitated to the extent where he could not tell right from wrong. And I would agree.
Yeah.
I mean, the report did say he was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and that he would need continuing psychiatric care or he could become suicidal. Mm. They even had the surgeon who amputated Oscar's legs, again, when he was only 11 months old. And this doctor came in and said that he would be severely impaired in a dangerous situation and he would be unable to flee if he was on his stumps. So again, I think this probably speaks to maybe why he had a gun, why he felt vulnerable. Because some people might say this was a heightened reaction to maybe hearing an intruder in the house, but I think his defense is really trying to highlight the fact that his vulnerability made it a heightened situation for him.
Well, don't you also find it interesting that his mother slept with a gun and so did he? I mean, we're also talking about learned behavior, but yes. I'm just putting that out there.
Yep. Now, let's talk a little bit about how Reva was found. It was revealed that Reva had her shorts on, so this could or could not mean anything. The prosecution is going to say that she wasn't using the toilet the moment she was shot because she had her shorts on. But of course, it's possible that she was already finished using the toilet.
Wait, I'm sorry. If she thought there was an intruder, couldn't she have been hiding in the bathroom?
No, not when you look at the timeline of events, at least according to Oscar, she was sleeping when the intruder, when he claimed there was an intruder.
Right, but he whispered to her, call the police. So couldn't she have ran to the bathroom?
She wasn't in bed. He whispered to what he thought was a sleeping Reva, but she was not in bed.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Sorry if I didn't make that clear.
Yes. Okay. Yep. Okay.
Now, the prosecution says that she was likely crouching down when she was shot and that she had her cell phone with her.
Okay.
Now, why is this important? Well, some say that this shows that they were in a fight and she perhaps locked herself in the bathroom to get away from him. Mm-hmm. But of course, it could be, I don't know about you, but I take my phone to the bathroom sometimes in the night to use as a flashlight.
No,
maybe that's why she had her phone?
Yeah. I mean, some people take their phone to the bathroom otherwise. Some people are just, want to be with their phone a lot. So there could be alternatives.
Yeah. But then there's also the question of why was the door locked? Again, this is just anecdotal, but if I get up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, I probably wouldn't lock the door.
Hold on. Think about it, though. You're in a new relationship, and you don't want the boy to walk in on you if you're using the bathroom.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, that's a fair point.
Yeah.
But I also see the prosecution's point that the way she was found suggested, or the way where she was shot and the way she was found suggested that she was not using the toilet, that she was crouching down and holding her cell phone.
Yeah.
So I understand.
Right.
There's some reports that say there's a text message to her ex-boyfriend earlier in the night. I saw mixed reports, so I don't know how much stock I put in that.
Okay.
Something else that I think is pretty interesting is Oscar claims that they went to bed around 10 p.m., but the autopsy showed the food in her stomach, the way it was broken down. She likely, the last time she ate was close to 1 a.m., which doesn't fit with his timeline.
Is it also possible, devil's advocate, that she got up and had a little snack while he was sleeping?
Exactly. That's why it's not one of the major points, but, you know, just these little things that, you know, came up. The trial would last 7 months, and it was extremely emotional for both Reva's loved ones and Oscar and his family as well.
That's right. It was a long trial. Oh,
Very
my
long.
goodness. That's really long.
And Oscar spent a lot of time testifying and giving his version of events. On September 12th of 2014, Oscar was acquitted of murder by a judge, but found guilty of charges that were comparable to manslaughter. He was also convicted on a separate charge that was related to him and a group of friends firing recklessly under a table in a restaurant. So basically, there was a situation where Oscar was at a restaurant with his friends and they were passing a gun under the table and it went off and Oscar shot. No one got hurt, but...
why so irresponsible with a gun, I wonder? Like, why?
I wonder even more so why that was tied up into this case. Because those charges were kind of tied up with Reva's case and they have nothing to do with Reva's case. But again, it's a different court system. So I don't know.
They maybe wanted to pack a lot of charges in case they didn't find him guilty of the top charge.
Probably, but there's two separate events. So that's because usually they do that. But okay, do you want to guess what his original sentence was? It changed a few times, which is why I say original.
Yes. Okay, so he was found guilty essentially of our equivalent of manslaughter. So I want to say his original sentence would be 10 years.
Okay, about half that. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison.
That's right, yeah.
Now, prosecutors were very quick to make a public statement saying that they would appeal the shockingly light sentence.
Right.
And they did just that.
Yes.
And about a year later, on December 3rd of 2015, a panel of judges at South Africa's Supreme Court of Appeals overturned the manslaughter conviction and found him guilty of murder.
Oh, I didn't even realize
that they could do that, right? It's so interesting.
Yeah.
Their system's very different. So the prosecutor was able to appeal, and then the panel of judges was able to reconvict him of a totally different crime.
Wow, without like trying him again. Okay, they just looked at... Okay, so what was the sentence after that?
Well, the trial judge sentenced him to just 6 years in prison for murder. So the prosecutors again appealed, believing that this punishment was certainly not harsh enough. So again, another
weird.
Appeal.
So weird.
Another appeal. So 2 years later, on November 24th of 2017, the Supreme Court of Appeals more than doubled Oscar's sentence to 13 years and 5 months in prison.
And that was his final sentence, right?
That was the final sentence,
yeah.
Yes. And that's a little bit more in line with manslaughter. But again, this is under a murder charge. So that's very light for a murder charge.
And he's out now, correct?
I'll get there.
Okay, sorry. Yes. Yes. Okay.
A few years into his sentence, Oscar met face-to-face with Reva's father, Barry. Now, this was part of a victim offender dialogue that he was mandated to do if he wanted to be eligible for parole. And I find this pretty interesting that they mandated this. I'm assuming it's because the victim's family wanted it. I can't imagine they would ever mandate it if the victim's family wasn't.
Oh, yeah, of course not.
Yeah. Now, after the meeting, Barry said that he still believed that Oscar was lying about killing his daughter, and he said he wanted him to stay in prison for life. But unfortunately for him, that would not happen. Now, on March 31st of 2023, Oscar went up for parole, but he was denied early release. The Department of Corrections remarked that he hadn't served the required time in prison and he would not be eligible for release until at least August of 2024.
Then why even take a parole hearing? It doesn't make sense to me, but...
I know. Authorities would later report that it was an error due to like a miscount by the court over how long he had already served in prison.
Okay.
So this is like one of those clerical errors that we say, how does this happen? But it happens.
Okay.
On November 24th of 2023, Oscar was finally granted parole and was officially released in January of 2024. So I don't know if you've noticed, but he's been in the news recently because this is a pretty recent release. It's about a year at this point.
Yeah,
right?
that's what I thought. How long did he serve?
Let me just tell you this part first.
All right.
So in South Africa, inmates are eligible for parole after serving half of their sentence and meeting conditions of good behavior.
Yes.
Now, this policy was put in place as part of the country's, quote, restorative justice initiative. And basically, this gives offenders the opportunity to acknowledge and take responsibility for their actions. Hence why Oscar was meeting with Reva's father. That was probably part of this program.
Yeah.
Though released, Oscar does have to live under strict conditions until the full sentence of 13 years and 5 months expires, and that is on December 5th of 2029.
Oh, okay. So 2029. So he got out 5 years early, basically.
That
after
is
serving
correct.
8+ years. Okay.
Yeah, he served close to 9 years.
Okay.
As I mentioned, Oscar was in the news pretty recently. So he was released in January of 2024, but in December of 2024, there were a few news articles, and that was another reason why I kind of jumped to do this case, is because there's kind of a renewed interest now, because it was quiet for some time.
A renewed interest in the case?
A renewed interest in Oscar himself. Now, he started dating a beautiful woman who the media dubbed a Reva lookalike. And once again, you know how much the media loves this. They do side-by-side pictures of Reva with his new girlfriend, talking about how Oscar is trying to find a woman who's just like the woman he murdered. This woman is a family friend, and apparently the two had been dating for some time.
Okay.
But again, Oscar was a national hero. So I think even if he didn't have this new girlfriend, I think everyone would still be very interested in what he was doing.
Sure.
Now, many reports say that his release was strategically planned to avoid media attention. Again, he has a lot of money. He's a famous guy. You know, when he left the correctional center in January, it was very quiet. And, you know, the media was not there. It was very hush-hush about where he was going when he was leaving. And he pretty much remained under the radar ever since. He's living with a wealthy uncle in a mansion, pretty much. You could see pictures of this mansion online. There's tennis courts, there's swimming pools. So that's where he spends his time. And he also volunteers at a nearby church.
Why does he live with someone?
I don't know if it has to do with one of the parole conditions that he has to live with someone. I'm almost positive he sold his house.
Yeah.
I don't think he ever wanted to go back there because of what happened there.
Yeah.
I mean, if you saw his uncle's house, you would understand why he, chose to stay there.
Yeah, no, I was just curious. Okay.
According to a press release by the Department of Correctional Services, there are many restrictions on when he's allowed to leave the home and also when he's even allowed to leave the district where he lives. So he can't really do much without permission. He's also not allowed to speak to the media. But his lawyer, Julian Knight, told People that his parole conditions, quote, allow limited time in the week to attend work and commitments and just church on Sunday. And per the Associated Press, Oscar also must attend therapy sessions as well as programs on anger management and violence against women. He also must complete community service hours. And again, he regularly meets with parole officials. Just like parole in our country, there's unannounced visits from authorities, and that'll happen again until his sentence expires in 2029.
All right.
So that is where we are.
Okay.
But what do we think? Did the system get it right? Is 9 years enough time to serve? Is 9 years too much to serve?
Let's point out that when we talk about the system, we're usually talking about our system, the American system. So their system is clearly different. So the question is, I don't have the right context in their system to say whether or not that was an appropriate sentence or not. I don't know what happened that night for sure. I remember at the time thinking, and I remember now kind of thinking, I don't think he premeditated, this murder. I don't. I think he's responsible. I think that he is, and I could be wrong. Look, I could be totally wrong, but I think he was a very reckless, quick to anger, temper, reactionary person. And I think he really should have known better, but I'm not sure that they got in a fight and he tried to kill her. At least I don't see enough evidence of that. I'm not saying that's not what happened. I guess what I'm saying is I don't see enough evidence of that. So if it was recklessness and negligence that led to this, then the sentence is probably around appropriate, even given in our system it would be. If I'm wrong, and if he was intentionally shot and killed her, then he he got away with murder as far as I'm concerned.
I mean, this sentence, it may be in line with manslaughter charges even here in the U.S., but it's so short for a murder charge, right? Remember, they did change his charge to murder.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry. So given that, yes, absolutely. It doesn't comport. The sentence does not comport with the crime then. No. I think it comports with manslaughter, but it does not comport with murder.
And of course, this begs the question, did his celebrity status help him here? Or some people say actually it hurt him because it held him to a higher standard. Yeah. It could really go either way.
Well, what do you think? Do you think this was intentional at the end? I mean, you did a deeper dive on this case than me. So I'm not sure.
that's a big question here is, was this intentional or was this a tragic accident? The way I look at it is either way, he should not have shot at the bathroom door. No. Even a self-defense argument would not work here. No. I mean, his defense team did try to say that his vulnerability made it so that it was self-defense, but he was certainly not in immediate danger. Now, if there was an intruder in the bathroom, that intruder was behind the locked door. He could have left the apartment. He could have called for help. There were so many other options that's kind of the part that I think about, because even if it wasn't Reva and even if it was an intruder, that's still not what he did was still very reckless.
I mean, there's, people will argue if you have an intruder in your home and you fear for your life, you have the right to shoot and to immobilize a threat. So I can see.
But they weren't coming at him. They were behind a locked door.
Right. No, I think what you've described anyway is he has a history of recklessness with a firearm. And he's, passing one around a restaurant for fun means he doesn't have the respect for firearms that you really should have. And I say that as someone who used to carry a firearm for work and who knows what a great responsibility it is and how you treat it like that. And it does not sound like he understood that responsibility either way.
And I've gone back and forth with, even that aside, the whole self-defense argument and whether or not what he did was okay, even if it was an intruder, just looking at the facts of the case, it's very hard for me to believe that he intentionally shot her. Yes, he does have history of being impulsive. He does have history of even being abusive to girlfriends in the past. If he did it intentionally, then there must have been something we just don't know about. Maybe there was a fight. He definitely showed jealousy. Yeah. Maybe he saw her phone that she had texted with an ex-boyfriend. Yeah. And I think maybe he shot at the door to scare her, not thinking that it would go through the door. Although I also want to mention the kind of bullets he had. I forget what they're called, but they're the kind that when they go in the body, they spread out.
Oh, yes. Okay.
So they're deadly. We're not obviously all bullets are deadly.
No, I understand your point.
But the type of ammunition he had was you shoot to kill.
Yeah.
And that's also, I think the reason why there was no chance in her for survival because of the type of bullets.
Right.
I mean, Oscar has always shown remorse, saying, quote, "I did take Reva's life and I have to live with it." Yeah. And he's always been very, very remorseful, very emotional. He says, quote, and this is in an interview on a broadcast called Reels. He says, quote, "I understand the pain people feel that loved her and miss her. Yeah. I feel that same pain. I feel that same hate for myself. I feel that same difficulty in understanding this. And I look back and I always think, how did this possibly happen?" Well, Reva's loved ones don't believe Oscar's story, and they have stated publicly that they do not believe justice has been served.
Sure.
So really, that's all that matters, right, is what is the victim and the victim's family.
I mean, it's not all that matters because, remember, we've always said that the justice system has to work independent as well. They have to consider what the victims have suffered in their family, but they also have to work independent of that and not be completely swayed by that. But in the end, you hope that they feel a sense of justice, and they don't. And they lost a beautiful person inside and out. I mean, it sounds like she was a wonderful person who probably would have contributed so much in her lifetime. They lost her. It's a senseless tragedy. And he comes out as a young guy, and he's living in a mansion and dating again. So it probably feels like, justice wasn't served for them. And I totally understand that.
I think they were very upset by the fact that he was released early.
Yeah.
And they publicly stated that they are serving a life sentence.
Yes.
And it's not fair that he is not. And I totally understand that.
At the very least, I'm sure they wanted him to serve his full sentence. And you cannot blame them for that.
Yeah.
So
Reva's family started a foundation in her name, and her legacy lives on. It's called the Reeva Steenkamp Foundation, and it's thatname.org if you'd like to check it out. And their mission is to educate and empower women and children against violence and abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not sure that we've covered this on other episodes, but I also have another case in the hopper that will be diving into this a little more. But domestic violence in South Africa is said to be one of the greatest threats to safety. And it's also an issue that has not been taken seriously enough. Many people say there's low levels of prosecution and conviction in domestic violence cases, and also frequent failures by the police to serve and enforce protection orders. Now, this is not unlike what we have seen in other countries, like our own, right? So this is obviously a problem internationally.
Right.
If you or someone you know are in crisis and need help, you can always contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline. This is 24/7 at 1-800-799-SAFE or 1-800-799-7233. You could also go to thehotline.org. And as we've talked about in other episodes, individual states also have their own domestic violence support as well.
Mm-hmm.
For international support, you should check out safeandtogetherinstitute.com. They have really good resources that they list out by country.
Oh, that's great. I was going to ask about the international help.
Yes, because of course today's an international case.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's important that, people know where they can find help, and there will be links in our show notes to all of those resources.
All right. Thank you, Amy.
Yep. Before we head out today, Meghan, we have a question from a listener.
Okay.
Allison emailed us, and she asked, why can the police search without a warrant? One of my friends had her house searched, and the police didn't have a warrant.
Okay.
So I get this a lot when I teach, that people say, I have a friend who...
All the time.
This happened to me. And I always say, I'm not a lawyer, but I can tell you what I know. Mm-hmm. So obviously today's case was focused in South Africa, but we'll be speaking about searches in the United States because that's where we study, or that's where we operate. There's a lot of exceptions to search and seizure. I'm not going to go through all of them because in my class, this could take a good half hour. So I'll just say a couple of them. Mm-hmm. Plain view is one that we see quite often. In other words, let's say the police knock on your door. They're looking for a missing puppy in the area. You open the door to allow them to enter, and then they see your drug lab laying out on the counter. You consented to them entering your home. That's now plain view. Mm-hmm. They can use that against you.
Right.
It's kind of the same with the seizure of like verbal evidence. Like let's say we're at Starbucks together, and I'm telling you about the body in the trunk of my car. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying it at a volume that a police officer sitting next to me happens to hear, right? So there's no expectation of privacy in certain situations. Yeah. Now, if I'm in the privacy of my own home and the officer has an ear against the window, that's no longer, in that area. Right. There's also search incident to arrest. There's also extenuating circumstances.
Exigent circumstances, when they think they've heard a cry for help or a scream or something that warrants immediate attention, they get through the door and can search. There's so many exceptions.
Yeah. I mean, consent, there's also obviously, like I mentioned, consent. Once you consent in any way, there's second party consent.
Yeah, there's a lot.
I could go on, and this is actually one of my favorite things to teach about. Are there any other that stick out to you that you want to highlight?
No, you covered them. The ones that I would cover too. Yeah.
All right. And actually, if you come to one of my lectures coming up, we might be talking more about that, because a lot of time you'll see illegal searches and seizures that often will lead to wrongful convictions or, lead to other issues. Now, if the police search without a warrant and it doesn't fall into one of these exceptions, then the case could be dropped, no matter how guilty you are. So it's very important for the police to follow the proper procedures. Allison, thank you so much for that question. I love any question that has to do with the procedure in our criminal justice system.
I know you do.
Yes. Now, if you have a question for us, feel free to message us at womenandcrimepodcast.com/contact. And as a reminder, if you are a patron at the Lifer tier, your question is guaranteed to be read on air. There's also a ton of other perks. As I mentioned, we have a lecture series. Meghan, you do an amazing book club, which people absolutely love.
Thank you.
We have our virtual happy hours. We have our extra episodes. So come check us out. Come join us on Patreon if you're interested in any of those fun perks. All right. Well, thank you all so much for listening today, and we hope to catch you next time on Women and Crime.
Women and Crime is written and hosted by Meghan Sachs and Amy Shlosberg. Our producer is James Varga. Script editing is by Abagail Belcastro. Audio editing is by Siler Burr and Jose Alfonso, and music is by Desert Media. If you enjoy the show, please remember to follow and leave a review. You can also support the show through Patreon, where you can get access to additional ad-free content such as exclusive full-length episodes, lectures, a book club, and virtual happy hours with Meghan and Amy. For more information, visit patreon.com/womenandcrime.
Sources for today's episode include BBC News Africa, Sky News, The Telegraph, The Independent, The Times Johannesburg, Sunday Times Johannesburg, The Guardian City Press South Africa, Daily Mail, ABC News, AP News, and 30 for 30, The Life and Trials of Oscar Pistorius.